Proceeding will start shortly. The 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 proceeding will start shortly.
Order, order. Before we begin, can I encourage members to wear masks when they are not speaking? This is in line with the current government guidance and that of the House of Commons Commission. I remind members that they are asked by the House to have a COVID lateral flow test twice a week if coming onto the parliamentary estate. This can be done either at the testing centre, in the House or at home. Please also give each other and members of staff space when seated and when entering and leaving the room. Before I call Taiwo Owatemi to move the motion, I'm sure that most members present will be aware that this debate was originally scheduled to take place on the 18th of October. It was delayed so members of this place could pay tribute to our colleague and our friend, Sir David Amess. His loss was felt acutely across the House, but it is a testament to him that his loss will have touched many well beyond these walls. I know it will have been particularly felt by many of those watching or with an interest in today's debate, as Sir David was a champion for those living with endometriosis, having chaired the all-party parliamentary group since its inception in 2018, and having been a crusader for the cause long before, after a constituent contacted him about their struggles with the condition. His signature passion, charm and humour will be sorely missed from today's debate, but I am confident that all those here are capable of contributions that would do justice to a cause that he cared so much about, and in so doing, pay tribute to him. I now call Taiwo Owatemi to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mundell, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Before I begin, I would like to take a moment to remember and to pay tribute to our friend and our colleague, Sir David Amess. Among the many worthy campaigns he fought for, David was a vocal champion of women suffering from endometriosis. David launched the APPG on endometriosis in 2018 and chaired it with the intention of raising increased awareness of the condition and the need to investigate how those who suffer from endometriosis can get the support that they need. And I'm certain that David, ever the advocate, would have been here speaking at this very debate. And by continuing to speak out on this issue, we also honour his memory. Now I beg to move that the House considers petition number 328570 titled Increased Funding for Research into Endometriosis and PCOS. For convenience, I would just like to quickly read the petition into Hansard. Endometriosis and PCOS are two gynecological conditions which both affect 10% of women worldwide, but both are, in terms of research and funding, incredibly under-prioritised. This petition is calling for more funding to enable for new, extensive and thorough research into female health issues. This petition was open for 6 months and it gained over 100,000 signatures, 200 of which are from my own wonderful constituency of Coventry North West. This is not the first time that we've had a debate on endometriosis, and this is not the first time that PCOS has been brought up in Parliament. And yet the government's lack of action in response to previous debate has compelled over 100,000 people to bring the lack of funding for research in these diseases to our attention once again. The opening speaker in a debate does not have to speak in favour or in opposition of a petition. They can choose to outline arguments dispassionately and then open the debate up. I, however, Mr Mundell, will not be doing that today. I want to throw my full support behind this very important issue. As a healthcare professional myself in the NHS, who has worked with endometriosis and PCOS patients, it is heartbreaking that we still need to be pleading for research money for two diseases that affect 1 in 10 women in the United Kingdom. That's over 3 million women. To advocate for this petition, I will first try to clear up some crucial misconceptions about both diseases. I will also outline the specific actions that the government must take to support women who suffer from them. But before I do that, I want to briefly say what endometriosis and PCOS are. Polycystic ovary syndrome, or PCOS, is the most common endocrine disorder in women, affecting 1 in 10 women, although it disproportionately impacts Black and South Asian women. It is characterised by abnormal hormone production in ovaries and can, in many but not all cases, cause women to develop cysts. Endometriosis is a condition where cells similar to those in the lining of the uterus are found elsewhere in the body. It affects 1 in 10 women, though disproportionately again impacts Black and South Asian women. Medical jargon aside, both diseases can affect women's reproductive organs. They can also, if severe enough, cause fertility issues as one of the many side effects. However, after spending the last few weeks speaking with women who suffer from one or both of these diseases, it has become clear to me that one of the greatest misconceptions surrounding endometriosis and PCOS is that they are often considered only to be fertility diseases. Thinking of them primarily as barriers to pregnancy or diseases that just make women's period more painful is a gross oversimplification of what they are and in many cases totally inaccurate. Both diseases vary widely in severity and in many cases and in the way that they manifest. For example, 12% of endometriosis cases can target women's lungs. Both conditions cause symptoms other than chronic pain. PCOS causes obesity, excess facial hair, chronic acne. These deeply stigmatizing symptoms can shatter a young woman's confidence and have debilitating effect on her mental health. Happy to give way.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for giving way. Would you agree with me that actually this medical gaslighting is arguably the biggest issue when you go to your GP, the medical practitioner that you trust the most, to be told that it's just a bad period? That's what we really need to change. I mean, yes, funding is a separate argument, but that's the main issue that we need to overcome before we can truly tackle these issues.
I thank my honourable, I thank the honourable member for raising an important point. But I think actually what the point highlights is the need for ensuring that within the medical curriculum for GPs and healthcare professionals, that endometriosis and PCOS are included, and that's why funding is so important to make that difference. Happy to give way.
I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I rise to support the petition too. My constituents have written too about their experiences, which obviously were written heartfelt. One constituent, it took 11 years to diagnose. Isn't this the absolute crux of the issue, that we need a diagnostic framework in order to get on top of this, these conditions quickly to help women not get into the severity which many women do?
I thank my honourable friend for making an important point, and I certainly agree, and I will be coming on to that in my speech. To add insult to injury, funding for symptoms such as obesity, excess facial hair and chronic acne have decreased over, well, excess ratio and chronic acne decreased over the years. Endometriosis can cause chronic bowel and bladder-related symptoms and depression. And yet, I have heard from countless women telling me that after they are finally diagnosed with endometriosis or PCOS, they are told by their GP to come back when they want to get pregnant and then sent on their way without targeted treatments. It is extraordinary to think that the same number of women in the UK have endometriosis as people who have been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And yet nobody would suggest that a person suffering from diabetes come back when they decide to get married so that they can manage swelling in their fingers before they buy a wedding ring. This would be absurd. 1 in 10 people in the UK suffer from asthma, yet it would be completely unthinkable to tell somebody with asthma to come back when you decide you want to run a marathon. Endometriosis and PCOS are about so much more than difficulty conceiving. But funding decisions, happy to give way, yeah?
Both endometriosis and PCOS can have a massive impact on mental health, and for a variety of reasons, pain-related or fertility-related. And mental health services have been chronically underfunded for years. Does the Honourable Lady agree with me it's important that the psychological symptoms of these conditions are prioritised as much as the physical ones?
I thank the Honourable Member for raising an important point, and absolutely, we need funding for holistic care for both endometriosis and PCOS, absolutely, especially mental health support for patients affected. Happy to give way.
And I think she's articulated the case for this extremely well. But would she share my opinion that one of the reasons that this is only looked at from the perspective of impacts on fertility is because for too often the medical establishment views a woman's biology purely from the basis of incubating babies and not enough about the impacts on general well-being?
I thank the Honourable Member for raising such an important point, but actually I will be coming on to that within my my speech. But I thank the member for making an interesting point. And I know from speaking actually to many healthcare professionals, some of them are very passionate about both endometriosis and PCOS, but would really like more funding and more support so that their colleagues and all of them within our medical profession will be able to get the necessary amount of medical education inside their curriculum. Endometriosis and PCOS are about so much more than difficulty conceiving. The funding decisions made by Whitehall keeps treating them as though they are not. This is why it is so upsetting, but unsurprising, that the government's response to this petition by discussing funding for fertility treatments. Responded to the decision by discussing funding for fertility treatments. In fact, when most young women start to see symptoms at puberty, pregnancy is the furthest thing from their minds. With this in mind, I would like to talk about a constituent of mine in Coventry North West. One of my constituents, a 14-year-old girl, was ostracised and relentlessly bullied by her peers for excessive facial hair, acne and weight-related reasons. She experienced such debilitating pain in her lungs and lower abdomen that she was hospitalised during a GCSE exam. After 5 years of calling hospitals, 3 painful exploratory surgeries, countless GP appointments, and several specialist referrals, she was finally diagnosed with endometriosis and PCOS. The only treatment her GP could offer her were generic birth control pills, with which no evidence-based studies confirm are definitive treatment for either disease. Happy to give way.
Thank the Honourable Member for giving me. She's making an excellent point. And I too have had experience of this with young women given contraceptive pills to deal with what the GP regards as period pain, only then to suffer the mental health impact because of the contraceptive pill. And they then find themselves in the difficult position where they have to choose between what the GP thinks is period pain and the impact of the contraceptive pill on their mental health. Does she agree with me this is simply unacceptable?
I thank the member for raising an important point, and yes, I agree that this is simply unacceptable. The only treatment GP could offer her were generic birth controls, which no evidence-based confirms are the definitive treatment for either diseases. And before she left, her GP told her to come back when she wanted to get pregnant and left her to figure out how to cope on her own in the meantime. Her story of feeling ashamed by her peers and gaslit trying to get a diagnosis is not unique, as many members have raised today. On average, it takes 8 years to diagnose a woman with endometriosis and years to diagnose with PCOS. Which brings me to my next point. The government needs to increase funding to study both conditions. With regard to endometriosis, we still don't know what causes it, effective ways of stopping it from spreading to other organs, and effective non-surgical ways of managing symptoms. 58% of women with endometriosis had to visit a GP more than 10 times to get a diagnosis. 21% had 10 or more hospital appointments. 53% went to A&E, and 27% went more than 3 times, all before diagnosis. Now, this is deeply distressing for the patient and a terrible, terrible use of NHS resources. Happy to give way.
Excellent case, and I absolutely support everything she says. I was horrified to hear from a constituent who, a qualified nurse, it took her 6 years to get diagnosed, and after 2.5 years of daily bleeding and pain, she was finally offered laparoscopic surgery, and then was told by healthcare professionals that the only cure for her was to actually conceive and have a baby, whilst also being told at the same time that she could have fertility problems. Does this not just highlight that actually there needs to be a lot more awareness and education amongst GPs and healthcare professionals and adherence to the NICE guidelines?
I thank the member for raising an important point, and absolutely it does highlight that need. Thank you. It is urgent that the government needs to invest in research projects and create more streamlined diagnostic practice. This must start with better GP training, as honourable members highlighted, so that GPs no longer inadvertently gaslight or misdiagnose anyone with endometriosis or PCOS. And it must extend to more accurate, less invasive screening technology used to confirm diagnosis. Once women are finally diagnosed, there is not currently any targeted treatment for endometriosis, none at all. Similarly, there is no drug or treatment on the market in the UK which has evidence-based approval to treat PCOS. We need funding for this research. We also need facilities to carry it out. There is currently only one dedicated PCOS clinic in the whole of the UK, and I'm very proud to say that that is in my own city of Coventry. I visited it recently, and I spoke with the head researcher, Professor Undiva Harpal, and their specialist nurse, Danielle Bate. They stressed the importance of treating PCOS as a disease in need of its own funding body. Currently, the limited funding we have for PCOS and endometriosis alike are attached to funding bundles for several other diseases, as is clear from the government's response to this petition. We should not be attaching research funding for these conditions as addendums to general funding for fertility diseases or other endocrine diseases. Endometriosis and PCOS impact millions of women in the UK. They are not afterthoughts, and we cannot continue to treat them like afterthoughts in funding discourse. We should encourage funding charities to set up independent boards for PCOS and endometriosis as well. Earlier this year, a Department of Health and Social Care consultation acknowledged the importance of improving research into women's health. This strategy for that improvement is, according to the government, now in development, and it would be really great to hear from the Minister just the progress that's being made with that strategy. I'd also ask the Minister whether the strategy would commit to establishing an independent, well-supported funding body for both endometriosis and PCOS research, as they are so desperately and deserving in need of it. I would like to end my remarks by thanking all of the brave women who suffer from endometriosis or PCOS, who continue to fight for increased resources. Without their remarkable self-advocacy and will to advocate for one another, I am certain we would not be here today. And I really do hope that this debate will provide an opportunity for the government to listen and to act. I thank you, Mr. Mundell.
The question is that this House has considered E-petition 328570 relating to research into endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome. As there are a lot of members who want to speak, I'm going to ask members to stick to about 3.5 minutes so that everybody who wants to speak will get the opportunity to. And I'm going to call Emma Hardy, followed by Jackie Doyle-Price.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I would like to add my thoughts and my recollections of working with Sir David, as he was chair of the all-party parliamentary group for endometriosis and I was vice chair. We worked very closely together and I really enjoyed working with him, found him to be a funny, engaging, generous man, and he will be very, very missed. And as much as I'm pleased to be sharing the new role of chair with my honourable friend, the member of Livingston, I don't think any member of the committee will quite get over the loss of Sir David. And the last conversation we had actually was we caught each other near the lifts, if those know it, in 1 Parliament Street, and he said, Emma, let's find out who the new minister is and we must get them to come to our APPG. This was during the reshuffle, and we must tell them about our report. Let's do this together. And I said, brilliant. And he says, I'll find out, I'll get hold of them. And I said, oh, that's great news. And I'm very pleased to say that the Minister opposite, just before this debate began, has actually agreed to meet with the all-party parliamentary group. So I do thank her for that. So I would like to just mention, if I may, our group and the work that we all did, and I can see members of the all-party group here right now, and some of the points that came up with. It was a really detailed piece of work. We listened to thousands of women, and Sir David chaired some of the events I chaired, and so did other members. And we were both very passionate about following up on our recommendations. And I think the point he made to me is, it must not be left to gather dust, Emma. And I said, no, it must not be left to gather dust. So we're going to push on with the recommendations from our report. So one of the things we talked about was highlighting the unacceptable delays in diagnosis, the need for research into diagnostic methods. One of the recommendation that government should commission research to discover the cause of the disease, because no one really understands why some women have this disease and some don't. There's no research on that. Better treatment and management options, and the dream for everyone, one day a cure. And increased awareness. It feels like we are becoming more aware of the condition, but I still find myself having conversations with people when they go, how would you say that? What is endometriosis? I've not heard of it before. So I think anything we can do to raise awareness and the understanding of the severity of it amongst health professionals, recognising it as a source of chronic disability and statutory support, looking at, we talked before about having a debate, and I think Sir David and I and other members of the committee wrote to the Minister in the DWP around personal independence payments and disability benefits and the difficulty women have accessing it for conditions like endometriosis. And the definition and the criteria around statutory sick pay, which doesn't recognise long-term conditions like endometriosis, and access to the appropriate care for everybody who needs it. I would like to mention the women that I met during my recent Big Conversation event, and I have to pay tribute to Mr. Phillips, who is an incredible consultant in this area, an expert in endometriosis, for all the work he does in my local area. And the women were coming back with the reports we've heard from all the women here, and that was, in fact, that this is a condition that takes 7.5 years to diagnose. It's not taken seriously. They're left in extreme pain for long periods of time. But I want to offer some hope to everybody about this, because I'm really pleased that Dr. Barbara Gwynn and Leah Coxey, who is a PhD student at the University of Hull, have just been given a very small amount, one could argue pitifully small amount, £10,000 of money to look into researching biomarkers for endometriosis, which would be revolutionary if this came through. If the idea you're able to give a urine sample and identify the biomarkers to find out whether you're likely to have the disease without the invasive medical procedures that people have to have right now. And my final specific ask for the government is with the Health and Social Care Bill. The Royal College for Obstetricians and Gynaecologists is asking for to make mandatory in the new integrated care system to ensure the NHS organisations are responsible for conduct and resource clinical research. So if we could include in the new Health and Social Care Bill that mandatory looking at research into this condition. And as I say, I'm just very sorry that Sir David's not here to be with us, but we will continue to push for all of the recommendations and all of the points that he stood so proudly for in our all-party group. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, yeah.
Doyle Price.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel. And I associate myself with your words and indeed the words of the two previous speakers with regard to Sir David Amess, who was a great personal friend of mine, and one, you know, what I was so happy to be able to work with him on this cause. Yeah. And he brought with it his characteristic passion and commitment, and frankly he was good at keeping us all on the ball, it should be known. Yes. But we will miss his leadership in this, but we will endeavour to make sure that the points that he was campaigning for are delivered, because as has been mentioned, he took up this issue when he was visited by his constituent Carla Cressy. And it is also one of the main beneficiaries of the sales of his book, Eyes and Ears, so available in all good bookshops. So do make your donation to the cause there. As the Honourable Lady's outlined, Sir David led an inquiry by the All-Party Group, and as many as 11,000 members of the public got involved in that inquiry, which is quite something for an All-Party Group to achieve. And again, it's a testament to the fact that, you know, he would always use good publicity to draw attention to the issues that he really cared about. And I think one of the things that I really want to log this afternoon is that for a condition that affects 10% of women, it has had staggeringly little focus. And, you know, I would just ask you this question, Ms Medall, just for your observations, but if something affected 10% of men, would we be having this kind of debate? I think not. I think not. But we really do owe it to all those women who suffer for years with the most debilitating and chronic pain and disability because of this condition. And I was very grateful to the issues that the Honourable Lady outlined in her opening remarks about the obsessive focus on fertility, because the truth of the matter is that women who suffer from endometriosis start to suffer from it the moment they start their periods. And I think we could do so much if we really led to some greater understanding about what a healthy period is. Because we're all brought up to think, this is your lot in life, it's all quite normal. We can all be struggling with the most debilitating pain and thinking everybody else is going through the same, when in fact they're not. What we're actually suffering from is a very, very unhealthy periods. So we need much more understanding, not just within the medical profession, but amongst girls too, so that girls can actually be more alive to when there's a problem, and they won't be waiting 8 years for a diagnosis of their problem. And as the Honourable Lady said, quite often it's only diagnosed when women are trying to get pregnant, by which time so much more damage could have been done, and there is treatment that could have been given to alleviate the condition. And we often talk about funding, and I think one of the biggest challenges we have in the NHS is not so much the quantum of funding, but whether we spend it wisely. And the truth of the matter is if we actually gave people the tools to look after conditions and know when they're suffering from ill health, we'd actually reduce the spend that the NHS actually subsequently has to have on this condition. So it's a no-brainer. And I'm very pleased to see the Honourable Lady in her place. I know she's had to listen to me bang on about these issues for very, very many times. I never miss an opportunity to beat ministers over the head when it comes to women's health. And I know she gets it. And I think we really do need to think properly about the well-being of women and the impact that their biology and their gynecology has on well-being, and think beyond childbirth and pregnancy. Because only last year, when Baroness Cumberledge produced her report, First Do No Harm, one of the headline conclusions she made in that report was that women aren't heard. Well, when women seek medical advice, they're belittled and diminished and shunned along. And as you say, this is all very normal. And that must stop, because actually women are important. And, we will have healthy pregnancies if women get support earlier. And we will all be better off. We'll have less work absence. We'll have a more productive economy and less demand on the NHS. So it's a no-brainer. Could I just say to the Minister, more research on endometriosis, please, and more awareness so that people can diagnose it earlier.
Hannah, and we're going to move, though, to a formal 3.5-minute limit.
Thank you very much, Mr Mundell, and it is a real pleasure and honour to speak in this debate. And like members before me have said, I pay huge tribute and thanks to the work of Sir David Amess. He worked tirelessly to raise awareness and improve services for those affected by endometriosis. His loss is felt keenly across the House and across the causes such as endometriosis that he fought so hard for, and it will be a true honour and privilege to follow in his footsteps with my honourable friend for Kingston upon Hull and Hessel. We made a decision that we felt was very important, that it was a cross-party effort to take on the role, because that was very much the spirit in which Sir David approached this issue. And in fact, the last conversation I ever had with him was about how we could make sure that that report did not sit and gather dust on the shelf, but also how we could include and encourage local groups in our constituencies. I know we all have many of them, and I just want to take a moment to mention and pay tribute to Endo Warriors in West Lothian. Candice and Claire are tireless campaigners, which actually led to this petition. I think the fourth largest number of petition signatures came from my Livingston constituency, to Endo Bonds, who work tirelessly across Scotland, Andrew Horn and Emma Cox at Endo UK. There is many people working in this space, and there are many, many sufferers of whom I have met. And when we did that report, I took evidence in Scotland from sufferers in Scotland, and the stories were truly heartbreaking. And this was in the middle of the pandemic, when those who suffer from endometriosis were having to wait even longer than they were already having to wait to get treatment, to get diagnosis. And that is something that just the number of members taking an interest and looking to speak shows that we need so much more time, effort, money and research dedicated to both endometriosis and PCOS, which devastates and blights the lives of women and sufferers across the UK. Mr Mundell, endometriosis, as we know, is a gynecological condition as common as diabetes, many would not know, affecting 1 in 10 women and those assigned female at birth, thus affecting millions across the UK. And it's a condition with a wide spectrum of symptoms, and I have friends who suffer, and it has had such a profound impact on their lives. And as other members have said, the kind of response that some have from medical professionals just simply needs to change. And we need ongoing medical intervention and research that improves the lives. If we take of those suffering, if we take an economic perspective, endometriosis costs the UK economy £8.2 billion per year through treatment, healthcare costs and the impact on work and employment. But it's not about looking necessarily at the financial impact, but the life impacts on those who suffer. Because despite its prevalence and impact, unlike cancer or diabetes, there is very little research, funding or widespread awareness about endometriosis. Yet it's listed by the NHS as one of the top 20 conditions which rank as pain so disabling that it can prevent you from doing daily tasks. A list which includes well-researched and funded conditions such as heart attacks, kidney stones, appendicitis and arthritis, to name a few. And as the Honourable Lady for Thurrock said just there, if it was men suffering, then, you know, I think the reality is, as those who have held positions of power for centuries, we would probably have had a solution and a cure much sooner than now. So the fact that Sir David was so determined to fight for women and fight for those who suffer and do it in such an inclusive way is a reminder to us all how we need to work and take that work forward. Because in 2018, only 2.1% of publicly funded research in the UK went on reproductive and menstrual health. That's down from 4.5% in 2014. Now, in Scotland, we have committed in the life of the next Parliament to reduce diagnosis from 8.5 years to 12 months. That's an ambitious target. And I think, you know, so often the nations of the UK are played off against each other and we compete. And of course, this is an area where we should compete, but we also need to work together because we have ideas, fresh thinking and opportunities if we can work together. And I know that that's what the Honourable Lady and I will do in the all-party group. And we look forward to working with members and having many, many more debates on this issue so that sufferers of endometriosis and PCOS don't continue to suffer the way that they have been for so long.
Thank you. We really do need to stick to the time, though, if everyone is going to get their opportunity to speak. And we'll hear now from a man, Robert Largan.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. It's always a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And let me start by paying tribute to the late Sir David Amess and all the work he did to establish the APPG for endometriosis. I'm Very grateful to him for his efforts. And like Sir David, I was visited at my constituency surgery by one of my constituents, Maddie Howarth, who's also campaigned tirelessly to raise awareness of endometriosis to ensure that other women do not have to go through the pain that she's endured. Aged just 13, Maddie first began to suffer from severe stomach cramps. By the age of 17, she was visiting A&E practically every month because of the pain she was in and the effects of the drugs she was on to manage it. But still, the condition went undiagnosed. Eventually, after several years had passed, she was referred to a gynaecologist for investigative surgery. And whilst waiting to see a specialist for diagnosis, Maddie was forced to give up her home and her job, being unable to work through the unbearable pain she was in or to access the support she needed. Then, at just the age of just 22, Maddie made the difficult decision to have a hysterectomy to finally stop the pain. I'm pleased to say that her health has since improved, but not all women are so lucky. An inquiry last year by the APPG found that the average wait time from the onset of symptoms to diagnosis was 8 years, and that whilst nearly all of those with the condition felt their mental health had suffered as a result, the vast majority have never received any psychological support. This cannot be allowed to continue. Several years ago, my partner, Beth, was diagnosed with endometriosis, and she's had to suffer intense pain, yet she's still on the waiting list for surgery. Needless to say, this is an issue very close to my heart. We all know of the impact that the pandemic has had on NHS waiting lists. Countless constituents have contacted me about how difficult they found it to access a GP appointment or the repeated delays they've experienced for routine operations. But this experience is one that women with endometriosis have lived through for decades. To stop more women and young girls going through the life-altering pain felt by those like Maddie and Beth, and if we're serious about building a more resilient and preventative healthcare system, then we have to change. This means cutting waiting lists for diagnosis, improving our clinical understanding of the condition, creating a dedicated care pathway, and providing stronger mental health and physical support for those currently living with stage 4 chronic endometriosis. This will not be an easy task, but it is a necessary one. Now is the time for those difficult conversations about how we view and treat women's health, and to end once and for all the unacceptable situation where women are left living in fear with unbearable, undiagnosed and untreated pain. We must change that now.
I call Belle Ribeiro Addy.
Your chairmanship. I also want to pay tribute to Sir David Amess, because I remember on coming into Parliament, I found it very, very impressive that for once a man was taking up an issue that affected so many women. And I know it's usually the women in the House that put these issues forward, so I think we should definitely have to pay tribute to Sir David Amess for the feminist that he was in that respect. And even though the condition is so common and the impacts are so devastating, you've heard time and time again that research is woefully lacking, and it's one of the leading causes of fertility problems in women. PCOS is definitely, and endometriosis can be also. But it can also have a devastating impact on your self-esteem, and if not properly managed, can lead to additional health problems later on. And I know this because I have endometriosis. My own experience began, I would say, when I was young, and I didn't think it was a particular issue. I always had extremely painful periods, and that was just life. And just as with all these things that have to do with women, I'm told that once you have a baby, then you'll be fine. And on being diagnosed with endometriosis, I was told, or potentially having endometriosis, once you have a baby, you'll be fine. And I remember when things began to get bad, I was actually sat up in the Member of Parliament for Hackney and North Stoke Newington office in 2017 when I worked for her. And one night I began to feel twinges while I was working late. And things got so bad, the piercing pain got so bad in my side that I had to hobble over the river to the hospital, St Thomas's, where I was in so much pain that they kept me in for the next couple of days. And then began waiting for the next appointment from my GP. And I had to wait so long for this, I called up an arts and they were just confused about what they were meant to do next. So it's only after many, many months that I then was able to get an appointment, and then had to wait for the appointment time, as you often do. And a longer process which went on for another 2 years. And through all of that time, I would have pain every day, as I do now. And I would have to wake up quite late because I would have pain mostly in the night time. And for the majority of women, their bosses aren't so understanding. Yeah. I was able to make it work, with thanks to the Right Honourable Member, was able to make it work with my times coming into work slightly later, working slightly later, working around my pain. But how many employers would be that understanding? And I eventually was given a date for a laparoscopy. And I won't mention hospital year here because they will be hearing from me. In 2019, in May 2019, I was given that date. And it went so badly. It was unbelievable. I was in and out of there so quickly. I had the procedure. They woke me up and they told me that they didn't find anything. And, you know, I would come too soon and I would go home. I was in so much pain, I couldn't walk. And instead of treating me any further, they said there was nothing they could do for me. They put me in a wheelchair, still in my gown that I'd had the operation in with blood on, and they wheeled me round to the A&E. Obviously, the A&E was absolutely fuming because you're not meant to do that, and they sent me back up to the gynecological ward, where, again, I was gaslighted, as somebody told me, that I would have to think about what I was doing, because it's clearly that I just had some sort of muscle pain. I tell this story today with not much time because I can't tell you how many women have experienced that. My diagnosis was 5 years. I thankfully went to King's College Hospital where I was born. I probably should have gone there first. I turned out okay. Shows it's a good hospital. And they were able to treat it. And so I instantaneously felt the relief of having endometriosis removed as much as possible, but it grows back. And so now I'm on that list with other women waiting for further treatment. We can't keep women waiting this long. I'll tell you from experience, the amount of pain you go through really, really does affect your everyday. So to members right across the House, if you ever see me looking at you slightly strangely, unless you said anything particularly obnoxious, it may just be because I'm in a lot of pain. But thank you very much for allowing me. Oh no, I've still got some more time. It's going the other way. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your contribution. I call John Lamont.
Thank you, It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair this afternoon. I associate myself with the remarks from yourself, Mr Mundell, and others during the debate regarding our colleague Sir David Amess. My thoughts and prayers are with his wife and kids at this very difficult time. I'm pleased to participate in this debate today in order to publicly recognise the great work that Endo Borders, set up by Taiwo Owatemi, who lives in my own constituency, is doing on behalf of women who are suffering from this terrible condition. Mr Mundell, as the other Member of Parliament for the Scottish Borders, I know that you are familiar with this group and the important work that they are doing in our area. Taiwo was diagnosed with endometriosis in 2017 following multiple misdiagnoses and went on to set up Endo Borders in 2019, giving up a career to focus on supporting the local community and raising awareness of this condition. Not only is this a fantastic group for those in the Scottish Borders, but they also reach out to women across the country who are all suffering from endometriosis. Now, I had the privilege of attending a recent meeting of Endo Borders and was really impressed by the courage of the women sharing their stories. Endo affects 1 in 10 women here in the United Kingdom, but despite its prevalence, not much is known about it and relatively few people have heard of it. I certainly hadn't until I met the group. Currently, there is no cure for endo and its exact cause is unknown. In Scotland, the average diagnosis time is 8 years. The difficulty is that there is not a specific list of symptoms for endo, as the condition presents differently in different women. Research by Endometriosis UK found that 54% of the UK population was unaware of the condition and 45% of women were unaware of the symptoms. To put this into perspective, a far greater proportion of the population have heard of diabetes, but endometriosis affects a similar number of people. So what can be done to help women suffering from this condition, and particularly those women living in my own constituency in Scotland? Clearly, awareness about endometriosis needs to be raised. Crucial to this is ensuring that Scotland comes into line with England by teaching menstrual health education at school. Without learning about menstrual cycle at a young age, conditions like endo will continue to go unrecognised, marginalised and misunderstood. Second, in Scotland, whilst there are 3 specialist centres for endo, the APPG on endometriosis found that since these have been commissioned at a local level, it can sometimes be difficult to get referrals to the different health board areas where these services might be based. It cannot just be a postcode lottery. Now, my colleague Rachel Hamilton, MSP, recently called on the Scottish Government to present a credible plan on how to reduce their own waiting time target for diagnosing endometriosis from 8 years to less than 1 year, and I eagerly wait the publication of this plan. Finally, I am absolutely clear that more can and should be done to improve research into this condition that affects so many women and the way they live their daily lives. So I therefore support calls to ensure that funding is directed towards new research into diagnosis, treatment and ultimately focusing on a cure for this terrible illness. I conclude by thanking the petitioners for bringing forward this important debate, but also the team at Endo Borders and the invaluable work that they do in supporting women suffering from this terrible condition. Thank you, Mr Mundell.
Share your praise for Tia McCready and the work of Endo Borders. Hugh Williams.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and begin by congratulating the Honourable Member for leading this debate in such an able way. As she noted, on average it takes 8 years for a diagnosis to be made. Unfortunately in Wales it now takes 9 years on average, and this does compound the suffering of people who suffer from marginalisation and, to be frank, poverty as well in their communities in many parts of Wales, and it is essential that that be addressed as soon as possible by the Welsh Government. I would also like to thank my constituent, Kate Alaska, who has been a tireless campaigner over a number of years, seeking greater support for those suffering from the condition in Wales. She has shown a remarkable determination and has been working essentially alone on this matter. And as part of her campaign, Kate has pushed for menstrual products to include labels listing the ingredients in the products. She has focused on that particular issue. I think generally men and women, everyone, deserves to be empowered with vital information about the products that they use and to be assured of their safety. So menstrual products are no different, of course. So I would like to just ask the Minister, is she aware of any ongoing discussions on that particular aspect with the Office of Product Safety Standards? I'm not drawing attention to it in order to raise undue concerns, but certainly my constituents would be very glad to be reassured that this issue is receiving proper attention. Kate's work has also highlighted the lack of specialist support available in North Wales, which means that lots of patients have to travel across the border to Liverpool, to the excellent Liverpool Women's Hospital, to have attention. And that, of course, is a further burden of long distances to travel. There is also, I'm afraid, an almost complete lack of service through the medium of Welsh. And with this sort of condition, I think having the ability to discuss it in your language of choice is a particular issue, not just in Wales, but I think throughout the UK. I don't know how much attention that matter has had, but again, I would draw it to the attention of the Minister as a potential issue. This is not just a health issue, of course, for those with the condition. It is debilitating. There's a lack of support, but also, as other honourable members have mentioned, statutory sick pay, for example, is only available to an employee for a linked period of sickness for a maximum of 3 years, which penalises those with chronic long-term conditions, such as endometriosis and other conditions, of course, as well. Many of those severely affected have struggled to access PIP and universal credits. It's clear that we need more understanding and education, and specifically, we need more research. I would end just by quoting Kate Lasker herself, and she told me, "Women with endometriosis suffer in silence, and very often they suffer alone, because no one around them can imagine their pain." Thank you.
Christian Wakefield.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. Can I first of all start by thanking the Honourable Member for bringing forward and leading on this very important debate, but more importantly to thank the Honourable Member for stressing for her own personal story, which I found very, very moving. Just like everyone else in this room, Mr. Chairman, it would be remiss of me not to mention Sir David Amess and the very important work that he did as chairman of the APPG. As we've heard from honourable members, endo affects 1 in 10 women in the UK, and it's a common, chronic, complex and fluctuating condition, and it brings about what I can only begin to imagine as unimaginable pain. Just like many members here, I first found out about endo shortly after I was elected. I'd never heard of it before, and it was in a constituency surgery where Katie came to meet me. And she talked about her debilitating pain, the impacts of her mental health, her endo sisters who were taking their own life because of the pain whilst waiting for treatment, the gaslighting she had to go through of it's just a bad period. And this is just the norm for anyone suffering from endo, and that is something we should all be ashamed of. It's clear from today and from previous debates that constituents across the UK that despite the severity of this condition, it's still taboo to talk about women's health and gynecological conditions. And as I remember from speaking the debate last year on the Cumberledge report, it's a damning and concerning issue that we only really talk about women's health and we only really listen to women's health when men talk about it. And we're here in a chamber right now with many people giving their own personal story. And I fear that we're at risk of still truly not understanding the issue because men aren't talking about it. When we spend so much more money on erectile dysfunction than we do on endometriosis, that shows where our priorities are. Workplace attitudes often do not help. We've heard the stories in the House over and over again when it comes to endo. Women are often not believed or supported by doctors, employers, or even loved ones. It's quite shocking that in a 21st century Britain, we still see women today being dismissed as lazy, unreliable, dishonest, and a nuisance in the workplace. And in the 2020 BBC survey on endo, almost all women responded by saying they felt that their career had been hampered by having this disease. So if appropriate workplace support for employees suffering from endo and PCOS is to be obtained, we need business leaders and managers to be equipped with the necessary information and knowledge to be compassionate when dealing with these cases. We should begin by encouraging employees to become endo-friendly, making sure that there is access to support for all those who suffer from it. And the current definition is highlighted by the Honourable Member for Hessel and Hall West. Good, got that one right. Unfortunately, these endo sisters do not qualify for SSP because it's a long-lasting chronic issue, and that is something we can quite easily fix very quickly. So during pre-COVID times, we've heard already that it's on average 8 years to be diagnosed with endometriosis. And that backlog is only going to be worse. So when we need to factor in the ability for GPs to actually have a greater understanding of it, we can do so much more. We have a duty to do so much more. We must do so much more. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, endometriosis costs the UK £8.2 billion per year through treatment, healthcare costs, and the impact on work and employment. So we need to do this from not only a financial majority, but from a moral one.
I'm going to call Barbara Keeley, and then I'm going to ask Alex Davis-Jones to make the final contribution to the debate.
Thank you, Mr Mandel, and it's a pleasure to speak in this debate with you in the chair. And I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Coventry North West, for the way she opened this important debate today. Endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome affect 1 in 10 women and those assigned female at birth in the UK. And as we've been discussing in this debate, that means over 1.5 million individuals are enduring a painful condition which can affect every aspect of their lives. It's staggering that this condition is so under-recognised. Common symptoms for a diagnosis include severe pain and heavy bleeding, but for those who have these conditions, Mr Mundell, that description barely scratches the surface of the reality of living with such a severe gynecological disease. One constituent wrote to me with a powerful testimony about her experience of living with polycystic ovary syndrome. She told me of a wide range of debilitating symptoms of her condition. She felt lacking in confidence and scared for her health and her future. She felt that no one understood her, and she felt alone and overwhelmed by the condition. And constituents who have contacted me about either endometriosis or PCOS report significant diagnosis times of between 4 and 14 years. This is an unacceptable amount of time for patients to wait while not getting the right care or even having a name for the condition that's causing their symptoms. I had endometriosis and it had a big impact on my life. I was not diagnosed until the age of 32, and I had multiple surgical interventions over more than 10 years. But surgery, as we've heard from my honourable friend for Streatham, does not cure endometriosis. It just came back and back. Delays in diagnosing and managing endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome can affect the quality of life, and worse than the impacts on quality of life, they result in a dangerous progression of the disease. Now, we've all touched on the work of the all-party group, and I join all those who've paid tribute to Sir David Amess as its chair. That's an excellent report that was produced following the inquiry, and I recommend that report and its 34 recommendations to the Minister, particularly those on investment in further research into gynecological diseases so that the waiting time for diagnosis can be reduced. But to these recommendations, we must now add the need to address the gynecology backlog made worse by the pandemic. NHS England data indicates the waiting list for gynecology services has seen the largest increase of all specialties since the pandemic began. Endometriosis UK's recent survey showed that 4/5 of patients with confirmed or suspected endometriosis had had NHS appointments for their condition postponed or cancelled due to the pandemic, and a third had not been given a new appointment date. A few weeks ago, Sarah Lambrecht told the Health and Social Care Select Committee about her experience of having her surgery for endometriosis delayed due to the backlog caused by the pandemic. The delay is going to be, in her case, 18 months to 2 years. She said, "I am 25 years old. For the next 18 months or 2 years, I cannot plan my life. I cannot plan my career progression. I cannot plan to have a family. I cannot take care of myself some days." It's very sad that Sarah and so many thousands of others have experiences with such impact from that disease. We need urgent action now so that those who have lived with the debilitating symptoms of endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome for so long are not suffering because of a long wait for treatment caused by the backlog in NHS care. We owe it, Mr Mundell, to those who have lived with these symptoms, often for many, many years, as I did, to reduce diagnosis time and improve treatments, and eventually to find a cure.
I call Alex Davis-Jones, who in fact will not be our last backbench contributor, because I didn't realise that Gavin Robinson wanted to speak, but we'll be able to squeeze Mr Robinson in, I think.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, and can I please associate myself with all the comments you made about Sir David and those comments of other members here today. Sir David and I shared passions in animal welfare and women's health, and I would like to put my thanks on record for all the incredible work he did in raising awareness of endometriosis, and it is that, amongst so many other things, that is David's legacy, and is a testament to him as a fantastic campaigner. As my honourable friend for Coventry North West has rightly said, endo and PCOS are two gynecological conditions which roughly affect 1 in 10 women. 10% of all women, or all those assigned female at birth in the UK today. 1.5 million people living with endometriosis and dealing with symptoms ranging from, as we've heard, chronic pain and fatigue to infertility. And yet still our research and awareness of these conditions is lagging too far behind. We've already heard at length that the average diagnosis time for endometriosis in the UK is almost 8 years. And for women dealing with these symptoms and living with this pain, this simply isn't good enough. In the worst cases, I am aware of women who have been told that the symptoms they are experiencing and the debilitating pain that they are living with, just like my honourable friend for Streatham, are just a normal part of life, or they are somehow imagined or exaggerated. Women with endometriosis have double the risk of infertility than other women, yet many have reported receiving little information from their doctor about the impact of their diagnosis on their future ability of children to have children, just told, try and have a baby and it might help. It is clear that this debate comes at a fortunate time, given that today marks the start of Fertility Awareness Week. Sadly, many women with endometriosis and PCOS have been left under the impression that they would likely struggle with their fertility, even though research from Endometriosis UK suggests that 60 to 70% of people with the condition can get pregnant spontaneously. As someone who has experienced infertility myself, I know firsthand just how difficult, challenging and upsetting news like this can be. Many of these women have struggled to get access to the care that they need to understand and manage their own fertility, and have been baffled to find out that due to a lack of research, the links between endometriosis and fertility are not properly understood. Fertility Awareness Week is a very important opportunity to raise this issue, and I would be grateful if the Minister could outline what steps her department will be taking to ensure that people with PCOS and endometriosis understand the impact of their condition on their fertility. It is clear that this petition rightly calls for greater research into cures and treatments for endometriosis and PCOS, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister as to what actions her department will be taking to support this work. Not only can these symptoms have a major impact on the quality of life, but there is also evidence that they have a major impact on women's ability to get on in the workplace too, and we've heard that from other honourable members here today. And I know of women who do not want children, who have felt that their pain and symptoms weren't being treated seriously by medical professionals simply because they weren't directly related to fertility. As we have heard today, women have spoken about the lack of understanding they receive from employers, from outright dismissal of their illness as women's problems, to losing their jobs for taking too much sick leave. Greater research and understanding of endometriosis is vital, but so too is education on the condition and its impacts. For far too long, women's health hasn't been taken seriously. And while I'm glad to see that progress has been made in Wales and across the UK, as outlined by my honourable friend, we still have a long way to go to ensure that conditions like endometriosis and PCOS are taken seriously and understood not just by medical professionals, but by everyone, from employers to teachers. For the 1.5 million women living with these conditions, we cannot afford to wait. Diolch.
I do appreciate you fitting me in, and I apologise that I was unable to bob throughout proceedings. Mr Mundell, two members this evening, the Honourable Lady for Thurrock and the Honourable Lady for Livingstone, have asked the question, if it was 10% of men in this situation, would it be the same? It's a very fair question. It's the right question to ask, and I'm sad to say, as a man in this debate, that the answerable is not one we should be proud of in this House. And so I say that honestly and honourably because I knew very little of endometriosis or polycystic ovary syndrome, just like some of the colleagues to my left. I have learned an awful lot through the courage of individuals who have come to see me, just like others have had constituents visit them. People who have had the strength and courage to share such personal and intimate information. There is a taboo around it. I've known a lady for over 10 years, but only in the last 2 weeks did she tell me that at 16 years old, she found herself before the GP with a diagnosis or suspected diagnosis of endometriosis, and at 16 was advised generally that if she were to have a baby, it would be of great help. Now, no GP should look at a 16-year-old in the eye and suggest that pregnancy is the answer to a medical condition, yet that was the experience that she got. One constituent in 2017 was put on an urgent waiting list. She's still waiting for surgery for her condition. She was a care worker, physically demanding job, so she had to stop, and she applied for universal credit. She was turned down and advised that she find work in a more manageable setting. That's not good enough. And so I'm encouraged to hear the work of the APPG on endometriosis. I'd be keen to get more involved. I'm here, Mr Mundell, because of the stories that have been shared with me. I think it's harrowing and it's wrong. And I would really ask the Minister she's not responsible for our devolved nations, but I like to think that here at Westminster you do have that convening authority across our United Kingdom. None of our trusts in Northern Ireland are accredited for surgery. None of them. The Western Trust was, that's Londonderry, second largest city of Northern Ireland. It has lost its accreditation. The Belfast Trust was on its way to get accreditation, and with coronavirus and no surgery, it can't get accredited. It has no plans to do so. I asked the question, what are you doing with patients that need help? And their answer was, we're not referring individuals on at this time. And so I would ask the Minister, across Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland, if there are services available and our constituents could use them from Northern Ireland, please make them available. Please find out exactly the state of play across the trusts and across the 4 nations and provide the assistance that these ladies so desperately need. Thank you, Mr President.
Thank you. I call Kirsten Oswald to respond on behalf of the SNP.
Mr Mundell, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for Coventry North West for leading this important debate so powerfully. And to all the women, so many women who signed the petition, including the 241 in my constituency of East Renfrewshire. Endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome affect so many women, and yet we hear so little about this day to day. So this debate is really important because it does allow us to focus on areas like research, where I'll be seeking some assurances from the Minister. But I think it's really important too that this afternoon we're shining a light on these conditions and helping a bit to let people know about the reality and the challenges of daily life for women who are affected. I'm not going to speak a great deal about endometriosis today, not because it's not important, it absolutely is, but because colleagues from across the chamber have spoken so knowledgeably and eloquently. But before I move on, I would firstly like to echo what others have said about Sir David Amess and the huge contribution that he's made, and to reflect upon a few things we've heard that I think really do bear further examination. The Honourable Member for Livingston spoke so eloquently about the support of women campaigners, and I really take my hat off to women like that. They are amazing people. And the Honourable Member for Rutherglen and Hamilton West noted the importance of recognising the mental health impacts of both conditions. And we've heard from Honourable Members across the chamber about the impact on people's working lives. But the Honourable Member for Streatham, I think, spoke most powerfully. She spoke so well about her own experience, a really hard experience as a woman with endometriosis. And I hope that the Minister is able to reflect on that in the context of her response and the need for research. But, Mr Mundell, what I really want to concentrate on today is PCOS. I've been contacted by a number of constituents who have PCOS, and I have PCOS myself. And like many women with PCOS, it's not really something that I've spoken about a great deal. And to be perfectly honest, it's not something I intended to speak about in the context of my work. It's a personal thing. But I decided that I would speak today because the silence around this condition really has to change. Because so many women are affected by PCOS, but so little is said about it or written about it, and frankly, so little is known about it. So we really need to shine a light on this and to push for far greater understanding and a far greater commitment to the research that can make a difference. Hear, hear. I was diagnosed with PCOS about 20 years ago. But to be honest, even though I initially spent quite a lot of time trying to research it myself, that was very difficult because much of the information you'd want to find, you'd anticipate being able to find, doesn't actually exist because of this glaring lack of research. And because, like so many other women with PCOS, because of that, I've been in the dark for a large amount of the time, just because there is not enough understanding out there of this condition, which has certainly impacted on my day-to-day life. I see that the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists have helpfully put that in a nutshell for us all. They've established that less than 3% of the overall medical research funding in the UK is focused on women's specific diseases like endometriosis and PCOS. These are holding back women's health outcomes and experiences. They're holding back our lives. And yet, that's the kind of priority, this less than 3% for women's specific diseases, that these issues are given. And I'll just reflect again on what the Honourable Member for Streatham described to us. So I am pleased that in the first 100 days of the new government, the Scottish Government has published a new women's health plan. It does include a number of actions to improve access to appropriate support, to speedy diagnosis and the best treatment for endometriosis. That's practical progress. I hope it will have a knock-on effect too in terms of PCOS. And that kind of practical action is really important. It will make a difference to people's daily lives. But we're really working with one hand tied behind our back if we don't have a focus today on the dearth of research and the lack of conversation around both of these conditions. And that's one of the calls being made by Verity, the national charity for PCOS, who do a fantastic job despite being volunteer-run, and they deserve our grateful thanks for their work and their focus. We might just want to take a wee minute to wonder why this condition that affects up to 10% of women has to rely on these volunteers, however professional and influential and brilliant they are, and they are all that. That is not illustrative of a collective appreciation of the harms that PCOS is causing daily to women throughout their lives. And the fact is that, like endometriosis, the cause of PCOS is unknown. There's no cure for it. That can be quite devastating to hear, because, as we've heard already, some of the symptoms can have a significant impact on daily life, a significant impact on what we would call normal life, and in such a variety of ways too. And bear in mind that some women will experience multiple of these issues at once. Difficulties like irregular periods or a complete lack of periods. Again, not a topic I ever thought I would be touching on at my work, but having experienced... I'm delighted to give way.
I thank the Honourable Friend for giving way, and would she agree with me that the speeches that both she and the Honourable Lady for Streatham have made today are the very reason that having diversity in our Parliament, having women in our Parliament who have different experiences, who will come forward and be so brave as to share their own personal experiences, is absolutely crucial.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and she's right that we have to listen to women's experiences, and I think that the honourable gentleman referenced that too. That really matters here. And I never imagined talking about my experience of menstrual irregularity, ranging from nothing at all to a full continuous 6 months of periods, which was both debilitating and frankly somewhat concerning. But it's fair to say that these are the kind of challenges women would really rather do without. Of course, we've heard about the irregular nature of fertility. Irregular ovulation or no ovulation is an issue for women with PCOS, who of course probably don't know that until they find out that they're not pregnant when they're trying to be pregnant, because that symptom of reduced fertility, difficulty becoming pregnant, can be the reason why many women become aware they have PCOS. That was certainly my experience, and it explained many other things. Maybe a wee glimmer of light in what is possibly a quite depressing contribution from me today. I do have 2 amazing sons, thanks to just a wee bit of PCOS-related medical assistance. And I can tell you, as we've heard so eloquently from others, that women with PCOS can have a difficult time in many ways, particularly with issues like hirsutism. That's unwanted facial or bodily hair. And I can't emphasise strongly enough how women are influenced by this, and again, there's no solution. Imagine the impact on the self-esteem of young women in particular. And I'll come on to this. PCOS doesn't only affect young women, and young women are not alone in having a severe impact on their life from these kind of issues. None of us want to be sprouting a beard, none of us want to feel unable to go swimming or having to cover up from head to toe. And the symptoms of oily skin and acne that are noted don't really cover the magnitude of that symptom either. Because the thing with PCOS is that it's often assumed to be fertility only, and that is a big issue. But all of these other issues affect how the world sees us and how we present ourselves to the world too. Things like thinning hair, male pattern baldness basically. That's a crushing thing to have to deal with. Weight problems, being overweight, such a common feature of PCOS women because our bodies metabolise differently. And for some women that has a significant impact on them, both health-wise and in terms of how they interact with the world. And depressions, mood changes. If I went through everything, we'd be here all day. So many things have a connection to PCOS, but again, we can't say exactly what or why because the research is not there. And as a younger woman with no idea where to go for support, it was very heartening to hear of women like the Honourable Member spoke about, communities supporting one another. That's really helpful when diagnosis is not straightforward or where the issues are not resolvable. But we need to do better than that DIY approach. So for young women today, for teenagers, it's rubbish. Imagine in this age of Instagram expectations, dealing with unexplained weight gain or hair growing where it shouldn't, worries about the future. And as for menopause, I have no idea what it means for menopause, but I'd certainly like to know. And when I looked into ageing women, the best I could establish is that it's thought to be a medical black hole. This is simply not good enough, and that's why research is needed. If I can conclude, Mr Mundell, by thanking all the women who have been in touch with me about this, so many of them, and thanking Verity PCOS and my constituent Angie Sandhu, who's in the process of setting up a group to raise awareness of PCOS and the challenges that it causes, so that we can talk about this more. And that will help because so many women are affected, so many women are relying upon us here to take this seriously. At the moment, it feels to them like a big, dirty secret, and that is what needs to stop. That's why we need research. I hope that the Minister has something positive to say on that.
Minister Alex Norris, and I'm sure he and the Minister will want to help me allow the member for Coventry North West to have a couple of minutes at the end of the debate to wind up.
Thank you, Mr Mundell, certainly. And in starting, Mr Mundell, you talked about doing justice to David's memory. And like I think possibly everybody in this place, my friendship with David was one that was funny and was light. But what I loved about him was how serious and passionate he was about the issues that he cared about. So I think we have done justice to David's memory today, and I think everybody can be very proud of that, and no more so in starting the my honourable friend for Coventry North West, who, as she said, could have talked dispassionately about this issue, but I think we were much better for her not having done so. And similarly, I always have pride and admiration in anybody who goes through the petitions route to secure a debate in this place, because it's very, very hard to do indeed. But the fact that they have been successful, I think, demonstrates the strength of feeling. And if that petition came from a place of frustration that these two conditions, endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome, lack the due public prominence, then I hope this debate in itself is part of tackling that, and that they themselves take pride in that. With regards to contributions from colleagues, I think that there were too many to cover all individually, but I think in aggregate that colleagues have written for the Minister a manifesto of where to go next. There were common themes of a desire for better diagnosis, a common theme of a desire for better understanding in primary care, very strong themes around the desire for more research, and then finally for better support at work or through the welfare system. So I hope the Minister takes from that 4 very concrete things that could be done quickly and could be focused on. There were a number of contributions I didn't want to miss, though, particularly from honourable members from Streatham, East Renfrewshire and Worsley and Eccles South, who all talked about their personal experiences. And I hope that the many people watching this, either in the galleries or online, who are themselves experiencing these conditions, I hope they took some comfort from that about the lives that their representatives live and how brave they are willing to be in talking about their own stories. And I think that really enriched the debate. And then also to my honourable friend, the member for Hull West and Hessel, and the honourable member for Livingston, our new leads as co-chairs of the APPG. I think we can have a lot of confidence in their leadership of that important parliamentary group, but also the hope that they both brought in their contributions. So I think that gives us optimism for the future. And then before I make a couple of points of my own, I just wanted to reflect on the points the honourable member for Thurrock made about the gendering of healthcare in this country. And once again, we saw, Mr Mundell, great parallels to the debate following the Cumberledge review. And again, the same message is coming back. But being very clear, Mr Mundell, there is a 1 in 10 chance that either of us might present to our GP with erectile dysfunction. And I know for certainty that that GP would not say to either of us to either come back when we wanted to have a child, or certainly they wouldn't suggest removing the offending organ. And we shouldn't tolerate that. Just as we wouldn't tolerate that for ourselves, we shouldn't tolerate that for anybody in this country. Just turning to endometriosis, Sarah Harris is a 23-year-old freelance journalist from my city of Nottingham who's written about her experience, and I just want to pull a couple of paragraphs out because I think they're a very powerful explainer of life with endometriosis. And she says, "It's hard to remember a time in my life where I wasn't in pain. Memories of my youth are intertwined with flashbacks, hiding in toilets as blood soaked through my primary school uniform, curled up on the floor of the nurse's office during secondary school whilst clenching my stomach in agony, skipping lectures in the first few weeks of university as I changed my sanitary pad for the 3rd time that hour. For a long time, I thought this life was normal. After all, from the age of 12 onwards, doctors had been telling me that this was all just part of being a girl and I had to deal with it. By the time I realised that this was in fact far from normal, it was far too late." And Sarah's story is not unusual. We've heard from colleagues that the average diagnosis takes about 8 years. The parliamentary's inquiry last year found that those with symptoms and later diagnosed with endometriosis, with nearly 60% of them visited the GP more than 10 times. 1 in 5 of them had 10 or more hospital appointments. Over half went to A&E, and of those, 1 in 4 went more than 3 times, all of that happening before diagnosis. That is a real system failure. And to put it in pounds and pence, if we really had to, that, as colleagues have said, is more than £8 billion a year through treatment, healthcare and the impact at work. That's a very significant challenge that I think behoves action. On PCOS, similarly, it affects 1 in 10 women. We know that whilst there's no cure, there is treatment, but there is exacerbation of long-term health conditions such as cancer, type 2 diabetes, and similar to endometriosis, diagnosis can take many years, and there is an evidence of a genetic link, and as my friend from Coventry North West said, higher prevalence in certain ethnic groups, including black women and South Asian women. So again, that is something that we really ought to, as a parliament, be getting a grip of, because these are significant challenges happening at a population level. And again, as I said at the beginning, Mr Mundell, the common theme is that this happens to women and those assigned female at birth. Now, at the moment, and we'll resume again tomorrow, we're talking about the Health and Care Bill at its committee stage, the final day tomorrow. And we've discussed women's health, we've discussed reproductive health, we've discussed the Cumberledge report, all those things on multiple occasions. And the story that we've had back from the government, because there's nothing in that bill on those issues, and our amendments, I'm sad to say, have not been accepted. But what I've heard back consistently from ministers is that the women's health strategy is coming, and that is where action is going to be taken. Well, I hope the Minister in her closing will make that commitment herself, because there's an awful lot of people putting an awful lot of stock into that strategy, but particularly that we will hear a commitment on research, because women's health is under-researched. The 2018 UK health research analysis showed that only 2.1% of publicly funded research in the UK went on reproductive and menstrual health, and that was less than half of what it was in 2014. Over 8,000 research projects funded by the National Institute for Health Research, which is an outstanding body, I believe, but of those 8,000, 10 were on endometriosis, 1 was on PCOS. So there is clearly significant space to do much better on research in this country. And we know that only last year in Australia, the government committed $9.5 million into research here. We need to have that sort of ambition in this country as well. So I'll conclude, because I know we want to leave the Minister plenty of time to come back on all the important points that were raised, by saying that I think colleagues have written for her a really good manifesto. We want better diagnosis, we want better understanding in primary care, we want more research, and we want better support at work or through the welfare system. Thank you, Chair.
Minister Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Coventry North West for securing this debate, but also all the petitioners who made this happen. And join everyone in my tributes to Sir David Amess. I know he would have been here this afternoon and holding my feet to the fire in terms of what I was going to do about the important issues that have been raised. And we've heard this afternoon from many, many members on all sides how the challenges that are being faced by women who are suffering from endometriosis and PCOS. And I just pay tribute also to the Honourable Member for Streatham, who I think couldn't have put it better in terms of not just the struggle for diagnosis, but the sort of the trauma of actually going through the treatment itself. And you know, that is unfortunately not an uncommon experience, and there are serious issues to address. And as the Honourable Member for Thurrock said, this is affecting a significant amount of women across the country. And so we're not talking about a small problem here. It's wide scale in its effects. And not just around the symptoms. We've heard members talk about the pain, the heavy periods or the lack of periods, the facial hair or hair loss, but it's also the implications long term. Fertility is an issue for both conditions, but it is about the effects on relationships, the effects on quality of life, the effects on mental health. The effects are wide-ranging. And it is unacceptable that the average diagnosis time for endometriosis is 7 to 8 years, and that 40% of women often take 10 or more appointments, even just to get to the stage of getting some tests done and being diagnosed. So it's absolutely imperative that we have a greater focus on women's health and address some of those inequalities. Because although members have quite rightly said it isn't just about fertility, if it is about fertility for some women, those 7 to 8 years may be the only chance that they have. And so that's 7 to 8 years too long. And that is why we're embarking on England's first women's health strategy, which will set out a new agenda on this issue. And I can confirm that it will include a section on gynecological conditions, including endometriosis research elements. So that in the short time I have here, I can't expand too much, but I will be announcing more details shortly, because we hope to have that published before the end of the year. And I know many women and men and families will be listening to this debate, and I want to put on record that I hear the concerns, I hear the issues that are being faced, and I have my listening ears on, and we will be taking steps forward to ensure that we deal with some of these issues. But can I just say that the NICE guidelines on endometriosis are really clear, and they list the symptoms that should be being picked up, that should be being addressed, and should be alerting healthcare professionals to referring women and not gaslighting them. And it's concerning that for many women, despite those nice guidelines for endometriosis, that they are struggling in the way they are. And for PCOS, there's clinical knowledge summary, which also highlights symptoms that should be being picked up and should be flags for referral to care. And I take the Honourable Member for Belfast East point. We heard from the Honourable Member for Arfon that when there's issues in Wales, women can access services in Liverpool. And I'm happy to meet with him to see what options are available for women in Northern Ireland. But I specifically want to, in the short time that I have, on the issue of research, because that's what's being debated here today. We do have a world-class research system in this country. The vaccine rollout has shown us that. But we know that women are underrepresented generally in research, whether that's older women, women from ethnic minority groups, women of childbearing age, women with disabilities. And there is evidence that research is not addressing women's issues. And it's crucial that we have an evidence-based approach to dealing with endometriosis and PCOS, because that's how we ensure that the gold standard of treatment is being followed and that women know what they should be expecting. That's half the problem. Women are in the dark about how they should be treated and how their condition is managed. But can I reassure colleagues that funding is available? And over the last 5 years, the National Institute for Health Research has funded £8.52 million worth into endometriosis research. There's a £2 million trial which is looking at the type of peritoneal endometriosis and looking at surgery versus non-surgical interventions to manage chronic pain. There's also a study looking at endometriosis in primary care and looking at the experience of both GPs and patients to see what's going wrong in terms of the diagnosis stage. And a practical toolkit has been put together to help both patients and clinicians. And we know that there's also a study being funded interviewing up to 80 women about what it's like to have a urogynecological condition and the experiences that they go through. And on PCOS, there's £6.6 million into research, including a £2 million randomised controlled trial looking at fertility options for women whose eggs aren't being released from their ovaries. So there is research happening. And my plea to researchers is that funding isn't the barrier. There's a really robust system where research is presented, whether it's from clinicians, from researchers, from charities, from other organisations, that will be judged on its merits in terms of what it's trying to achieve. And the funding envelope is not the barrier. And so I would encourage those who want to do research to come forward. If that isn't happening, then I'm very happy to work with the APPG to find out where those gaps are and if the research isn't being accepted or being funded, where we can do better. I will do, yes, briefly.
Of the backlog in gynaecology, and I think that's a serious point too. 80% of women confirmed or suspected endometriosis had their NHS appointments postponed or cancelled due to the pandemic, and I quoted somebody who now has to wait 18 months to 2 years for her surgery. That's not acceptable.
No, I absolutely take the Honourable Lady's point, and that's in the spending review there's been money allocated for elective procedures and to clear some of that backlog because there are people waiting for a long time and every effort will be made to clear that backlog as soon as possible. Just in a couple of minutes that I have left, I just want to reassure colleagues that we want an evidence-based pathway for women for both endometriosis and PCOS, both for NICE guidelines and not just developing but making sure they're followed in a clinical setting so that women know what to expect. In clinical education to improve both undergraduate and postgraduate training so that clinicians have the knowledge they need on both conditions. In primary care to make sure that there are, again, a good, robust knowledge amongst GPs about both these conditions, and it isn't just bad periods or abdominal pain, and the referral pathways that should be being followed. And for school education as well. It's so important that young women know what is and isn't acceptable in terms of both these conditions. So they're pushing GPs and not waiting 7 to 8 years for diagnosis and not waiting 10 to 12 appointments in order to get an answer. So there are a number of areas there where research can make a real difference. But I want to reassure colleagues, finally, before I hand back over to the honourable friend for Coventry North West. Just to say that funding is available, and I would urge all researchers who want to conduct research in this area to submit applications and submit bids, because there's no way that we're going to deal with many of the issues that were raised today. I won't, just because the Honourable Lady's got to wind up. I just want to reassure people that funding is available, but I'm committed to working with the APPG to ensure that that funding reaches the places it needs to.
Thank you. And I'd now ask the Honourable Lady for Coventry North West to conclude the debate.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. I would like to thank all the members who spoke so passionately in this important debate. Broadly speaking, I am looking forward to hearing back from the government about their strategy for making funding for endometriosis and PCOS more readily available, and their progress on how the strategy for improving research into women's health will establish well-supported, dedicated funding bodies for both endometriosis and PCOS research. I'd also like to quickly highlight some of the many important remarks made during this debate. My honourable friend, the member for Hall West and Hessel, underscored the fact that we do not know what causes endometriosis and that we need dedicated funding to determine this condition's cause. I also agree completely with the honourable member for Thurrock in the crucial point that we need to destigmatise and demystify many of the symptoms associated with endometriosis and PCOS. And finally, I want to thank my honourable friends, the member for Streatham and the member for Worsley, and also the honourable member for East Renfrewshire for all their powerful stories, which illustrates the need for supporting women from these conditions better than any statistics or figures ever could. Simply put, Mr Mundell, we need more funding to research endometriosis so that we can combat both endometriosis and PCOS. And thank you to every member who participated in this debate. Thank you, Mr Mundell.
Thank you. I am sure Mr Norris was correct that Sir David would have been pleased with the terms of the debate, but as the Minister said, I'm sure he would have been holding her feet to the fire after the debate as well. The question is that this House has considered E-petition 328570 relating to research into endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.
Right, shall we start? Do you want to read any of it or just go straight in? I don't mind. Order. Before we begin, can I encourage members to wear masks when they're not